The next item is a recommendation the Council direct staff to provide a letter of comment to the National Energy Board based on the key considerations identified in the staff report dated February 28, 2017, with respect to the pipeline between Watson Elementary School and Deerfield Crescent. And we have a presentation.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Clute, seconded by Councillor Attrell. Mr. Blaine.
So for background, the city submitted a letter of comment to the National Energy Board in August of 2015 detailing 5 key city concerns. Throughout the process, staff attended the August 2016 ministerial panel hearings in the Fraser Valley. Staff have discussed alternative routes with Kinder Morgan, specifically a Trans-Canada Highway and the BC Hydro right-of-way. And the Kinder Morgan letter of February 15th, 2017 provides some details on alternate routes. The comment letter to the National Energy Board had, as I mentioned, had 5 key points: protection of the Sardis Fetter aquifer during construction and operation of the pipeline, protection of the city's natural areas, socio-economic impacts of construction, their communication plan, and timing of construction at the Vetter River. Just to illustrate, so the current pipeline route runs through the middle of the city and through our aquifer area and a couple of neighborhoods, and that's the part we'll be discussing. The BC Hydro right-of-way is the double line shown here. We did, at the very beginning, discuss alternatively running along the Trans-Canada Highway, but received a negative response from both Kinder Morgan and the Ministry of Transportation, and that information is outlined in the Kinder Morgan letter. So the route alternatives we've been discussing more recently. So this is a blow-up of the area in question. This is the BC Hydro right-of-way, and this is what they call their P1 alternative route, which was the preferred route, and that's what went before the National Energy Board. It follows the follows the BC Hydro right-of-way. It would eliminate construction through these 2 neighborhoods, and it would pull the pipeline further away from our production wells. However, it's our understanding from correspondence from Kinder Morgan that BC Hydro has indicated they would not permit the pipeline to go in their right-of-way. So their alternative is to follow through their existing right-of-way, which will, of course, involve construction through these 2 neighborhoods, this one and south of Watson Road. And at the initial discussions with Kinder Morgan, they had come to us with a proposal to tunnel, which would eliminate surface disruption, but would put the pipe very deep, up to 20 meters deep. And as indicated in the staff report, city staff indicated that would not be acceptable simply due to the risk to the aquifer. With a pipe at the surface, there's lots of opportunity for monitoring and finding out if there's a spill. With it 20 meters deep, there would be no indication possible. So Kinder Morgan has indicated in the letter that they're going back to open trench construction, which is surface construction, dig an open trench and put the pipe in. That will require work in these backyards and extensive restoration work. There's also some discussion about the Brown Creek wetlands. The original proposal from Kinder Morgan, again, would have been a tunneling proposal that would have gone from north of our dike on the north side of the Vetter River to south of our dike on the south side, and would have bypassed the Brown Creek wetlands altogether. They have indicated that due to geotechnical reasons, that construction methodology won't work. So they still intend to tunnel under the Vetter River, but it's a different type of tunneling, and they won't be able to reach as far, which means the pipe will come up in this area shown here. This is currently an open field used for cattle grazing, but it is in the Brown Creek wetland area. So the recommendation is that we provide a letter of comment with some key points. Number 1 is we get the documentation from BC Hydro confirming exactly why it's impossible for Kinder Morgan to be in the right-of-way. The depth of the new pipeline be limited so it's well above the water table. Require use of pipeline design and construction methods that reduces impacts on properties as much as possible. Require automated vapor monitoring, so this is monitoring that would assist if in the event of a spill for early detection, and monitoring and spill response plans be developed in cooperation with the city.
Thank you very much, and I want to say a huge thank you to you, Mr. Blaine, for not only the presentation, but for meeting together with Kinder Morgan and discussing our very serious concerns about this. And I think probably the first thing that I think our council should really get confirmation on is whether or not, what were the criteria by which BC Hydro, the criteria that they used to determine that this was not a proper placement for the pipeline, because of course this is our first choice. It moves it further away from our aquifer, and it also keeps disruption out of people's yards. I know that a lot of people in our community don't understand that there's already a pipeline under their backyard, and but I think for a lot, even if they are assured by Kinder Morgan that their backyard will be put back to its original state, that might be a small assurance for them. And I'm really thankful too that you've identified that we don't want the pipeline to be any more than 2 meters from the top. I think that gives us a very good opportunity to be able to monitor and to determine if there ever was a leak, God forbid. And the vapor monitoring. Can you just talk a little more about the vapor monitoring for us?
Your Worship, it's essentially a well that's drilled near the pipeline. There'd be an automatic sensor in the well casing, and what it would be measuring is the vapors, and if they detect oil-based vapors, then that would set off, alarm on either the cities or both SCADA systems, and it would indicate that we have to go and investigate and find out what's going on. So it's an early warning detection.
Thank you for that. And I do know that we'll continue to work to make sure that monitoring of the pipeline and spill response are clearly defined and agreed upon by the city as well. But I'm wondering if we could, if this motion, to go along with this motion, if we could also write a letter to the province indicating our displeasure at the proposed pipeline route being not being able to use the hydro right of way, and asking the province to ensure that there's a solid rationale for that as well. If council is, yeah, okay, moved and seconded on the amendment. All those in favor on the amendment?
Yeah, can I speak
Councillor
to it?
Lum?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if instead of only including the hydro right away, we include the MOTI right of way as well.
Sure, I think we could put that in there. We have heard from them on that they can't accommodate the MOTI because of existing infrastructure that is alongside of the highway and because of the proposed widening of the highway. But it never hurts to ask a question from another source too. So, yes.
In terms of the existing infrastructure, that was it was telecommunications infrastructure that they were concerned about.
I'm sorry, the which infrastructure?
It was telecommunications infrastructure.
I think there are a few others as well, and I think they also were concerned around, we have many overpasses. Maybe Mr. Blaine, if you could just talk about the overpasses and the kind of challenges that the overpass presents.
Yeah, the two main things, as I recall, were the telecommunications infrastructure and the impacts or the difficulty of having the pipe there when they go to do overpasses. As you recall, when we did the Evans Road overpass, there's extensive ground densification work needed to meet the earthquake code, and the types of vibration and work that goes on with that would be incompatible with being right beside a large oil pipeline.
Councillor Lum?
Thank you. In terms of that, those concerns, and I'd be very curious to see what the hydro concerns are. I'm just wondering if there's infrastructure that maybe we don't know about that is perhaps more critical than drinking water. But if there is, I'd certainly be interested to hear about it. But if there isn't, and I suspect there isn't, I think they should take a good long look at it, because nothing is more critical than protecting our aquifer and our drinking water. And I think we need to push on this one and ask them to reroute. It's got to go back to the NEB. I don't want to come back to this 60 years later wondering why, when we had an opportunity to route a pipeline, we routed it right back through an aquifer of drinking water. And this reroute won't protect upstream effects to the Yarrow Waterworks system and the wells that exist in the aquifer. So I think we need to very strongly word that letter.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Mr. Blaine. Have you got anything to add to that?
No, Your Worship, I think I have clear direction from Council.
All right. Councillor Popov.
Your Worship, through to staff, is there any inkling or any feelings why Hydro won't allow the reroute? Because it's one of these things that makes sense. And
Maybe I'll ask Mr. Sanderson. He's been working on this file as well.
okay, thank you.
And is walking towards the podium.
Look at
So
that.
convenient. Mr. Sanderson.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Popoff. The reports we've received from Kinder Morgan about BC Hydro's concern relate to inductive concerns. So the proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline is made out of metal, and whenever you have a piece of metal running in the same direction as the 500,000 volt transmission lines, there's an inductive voltage loss, and that's a concern for BC Hydro. And they are, of course, in a position of authority because they have an exclusive right-of-way across those private lands, and no other right-of-way can be granted in that area of that right-of-way without BC Hydro signing off. I do know that, and I have seen some of the extensive work that Kinder Morgan and BC Hydro did together to model the potential impacts to determine how close a pipeline could be laid to those overhead power transmission lines. And so they did work on it exhaustively, and so I think if we write to them and ask them, they'll be able to answer our questions specifically and definitively.
Thank you, Mr. Sanderson. Councillor Waddington.
Just while Mr. Sanderson's up at the mic, a follow-up question to that then. Can you speak to similar concerns in terms of their validity in the MOT right away? Were there, in your opinion, substantial concerns that we should be aware of?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Waddington. To quote Mr. Blaine, the reasons we were given were primarily other utilities in the Trans-Canada Highway right-of-way. The example is the telecommunications on the south side, and then every mile or so there's an interchange, which complicates the through corridor for a utility. Each one of those interchanges will be subject to some work going forward in the next 10, 15, 25 years as the Trans-Canada Highway gets widened from its current 4-lane to 6-lane. So naturally the ministry was reluctant to give authority to Kinder Morgan to place their pipeline in that right-of-way.
Okay, thank you. And if I made my original question, which was, we talked a little bit about spill response and that kind of thing, but has Kinder Morgan given any indication as to the actual location of spill response teams or spill response equipment in proximity to the proposed crossing of the aquifer and the Veta River? And then further to that, do we have assurances of shut-off valves and those sorts of things? Do we have modeling of how much volume could spill even between shut-offs if there was a breach in the pipe?
Mr. Sanderson.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Waddington, I'll just answer those questions backwards. The valve locations we have in their design work, they've at our request, they've installed one at South Sumas and Silverthorne, and there's one on the far side of the Veta River crossing near Giesbrecht, and that will limit the volume in the case of a spill near the aquifer or the Veta River crossing. And they have done modeling to show those results. They're still developing their spill response, so we don't know yet an answer to your second question. I will pose that to them.
And currently there is a shut-off valve, but it's by Popcom, is that correct?
There is one at Popcom because there's a pump station there, Your Worship.
Right.
There's also one near the Trans-Canada Highway.
Quite a distance from our aquifer.
That's correct.
Okay, are you finished, Councillor Waddington? And Councillor Clute.
Thank you, Your Worship. While the MOT might be reluctant to look at their right-of-way, I think it can be pointed out that they were willing to, Kinder Morgan was willing to tunnel at 20 meters deep, and that's obviously, I would think, would be an option under some of the interchanges as well. I know probably not as cost-effective, but I think that can be pointed out as well.
I think the concern about tunneling that deep is really the detection of a leak, that we weren't really excited about that over the aquifer for sure, but. Anything else, Mr. Sanderson?
No, Your Worship. So
maybe a reminder to council that tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, there is an open house for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and I'm encouraging all of council to attend if you can. They have said it's by invitation, but they would not turn anyone away, so bring your relatives and your friends and anyone who's interested in the pipeline. And the last word goes to Councillor Lum.
Thank you, Your Worship, and try to keep this to the amendment as well. In our letter, I'm wondering if we could also include provision of documentation from Kinder Morgan on why they were willing to route around the Shiam Lake wetland, sensitive area of the Shiam Lake wetland, but they wouldn't consider an alternate route around the Brown Creek wetland.
Thank you. So on the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. And on the main motion, as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanderson. Next item, please.
The next item